right. Happy. We've now determined it's Thursday. I needed a gentle reminder, but happy Thursday and welcome to this exploration, this masterclass on how to figure out what you want and create a plan to get there. So this is a big topic. And I would offer that it is perhaps the topic, the question that brings individuals to me, right? Because we kind of feel like we're adrift and we don't know how to answer, well, what is it that you want? And actually, it is the hardest question when I ask my very fabulous people that I get to work with, well, what is it that you desire? Or what would feel good? What would feel delicious? At the beginning, it's often like deer in the headlights. And I say that with all the love in the world, right? But we are just so not good at knowing what we want. And there are a few reasons. So today, my intention, my hope for you is that we start to create some space around this topic and give you some practices to begin to play with this idea of naming and claiming and then inhabiting, owning what it is you want, and kind of debunking some of the reasons why we're not very good at this. Yeah. So what I'd love to do to get us started is for you to put in the chat, for those of you that are here live, you're like, oh, this is about to get real because Elena's going to make us work. Indeed. In the chat, I would love for you to consider, what is one goal that you have been working on recently that has felt that you either have felt unsure about or has felt really hard to move forward with? And some of you might be like, just one? Yeah, just one for right now. Just one. Go ahead and put that into the chat if you would be so kind. Getting new clients. Yeah. All right. What else? So what's so interesting is that this whole idea of what it is we want, I think is such a loaded phrase, and all of the words around it are loaded. Desire, right? What you crave, wishes, goals, dreams. We have so much baggage around these words. Maintaining new connections with low stress. Yeah. All right, thank you for sharing those. So there's this aspect of we come to this topic with a lot of stuff, a lot of history and a lot of expectations. So a lot of past stuff and a lot of future stuff. But what I want to offer you is it almost always is so much less complicated than we make it. And I will share with you a very real-time story. So this morning, I woke up not to sunshine. It was pouring down rain, actually. But by the time I eventually got out of bed and after playing with my morning practice, the sun was out. And I sat here in my office on my couch reading, and I couldn't help but look at the blue sky. It was like the bluest blue I had seen in I don't know how long, which is probably me being overly dramatic, but it felt like that. The greenest green and the pink from the wildflowers, it's like they were waving at me. And I sat there thinking about, why is this sticking out to me so much right now? Right? Well, I mean, for the obvious reasons of it's been rainy for several days here. So there's that, but also I had been in a spiral, there's no other way to call it, of all things brain drama, because our brain is this incredibly powerful thing, right? For those of you that weren't, on the call at the very beginning before I started recording, we've got COVID in the house, hooray. My teenage daughter, who luckily her symptoms are improving, no more fever, all the things. Thank you, vaccines, for making it be not a huge deal and for us to all be healthy, and a negative COVID test for me. And yet, here's what happened, right? When we saw her starting to feel yucky and you start thinking COVID and then you go get the test, I intuitively knew she had it. My ex-husband told me I was overreacting. It's okay, we're not gonna go there. But then she gets the results. And then magically, not so much magically, my throat starts to hurt, right? And I start feeling tired and fatigued and all of these things. Do you see where we're going? Right, so for 2 days, now my throat does hurt, not gonna lie, and I am congested. But, right, what happened over these first few days of this week is that rather than focusing on feeling vibrant and strong, I went down into this brain spiral of, oh, I must be sick. Like I clearly, how could I not have COVID? I was in the car for 8 hours over, 3 days with someone who was COVID. Like, how could I not? And so your brain starts looking for evidence. And this is why I share this story, because last night, to honor the fall equinox, I sat in my closet sanctuary space and I lit a candle and I journaled about what is the new, what am I ready to let go of? What old story? And this is an old story that I continually practice letting go of. That my body isn't my ally, that I can't trust my body isn't strong. And I decided, no, you know what? Even in the face of having a sore throat and isolating and all of these things, I know that my body has everything it needs. I know this. So I came back to that and I just breathed it in. It doesn't negate the fact that my throat hurts. It doesn't negate the fact that I didn't sleep great. But when I woke up this morning, I got out of bed and I went back to my meditation and I went back to my creativity practice, things that I haven't been doing the last few days, but these things that helped me get rooted. And then the sun came out and I was able to notice it and I allowed that to touch my heart rather than focusing on the sore throat and the not having results yet and all the things. Now, this might not seem like it has anything to do with how to figure out what you want, but I would offer that it is the precursor, because figuring out what you want is less about the stuff and more about a feeling. And some of you have heard me talk about this before, but it's this idea that what we pay attention to is what grows. And we are really good at saying things like, well, I don't know what I want, or I don't know how to get it, or now isn't a good time, or I kind of feel guilty about wanting that. I shouldn't want that. I have things pretty good. Why do I need that? Does any of that ring true to anybody? Yeah, right? So we tell ourselves, we have all of this language for not giving ourselves permission. So let's backtrack for a second. Babies, when they're born, they come out wanting stuff, right? That cry that they do that gets everybody's attention. We don't necessarily know what it is they want, but we know they want stuff. They want to be fed. They, want to be cleaned. They want to be loved. And they ask unapologetically in the way that they can. They cry out. They reach out. Right? Think about a baby who's just sitting there in their crib or in their stroller and is just looking. Right? It's that like wonder and awe at all the things. And they are not afraid to go up and like, have you ever had a necklace or a piece of like an earring, gripped by a baby who's like, ooh, that looks shiny and lovely. I'm gonna take that, I'm gonna put it in my mouth. Right? There is no shame for a baby because they haven't learned that it's not, that they shouldn't. Dogs are the same. Dogs go after what they want pretty unapologetically, right? We as humans we're born with desires, with wants, with needs. But over time, as we grow, we're told that we shouldn't want certain things, that it's selfish, that we should prioritize others, right? We learn that there are conditions that first you have to do this and then you can do that. Over and over, that pattern gets repeated. How many things have you put off because now wasn't the right time, or X, Y, and Z hadn't been done? Anybody ever have anything like that? You can even take yourself off of mute and share, or put it in the chat. What is something that you have put off because either X, Y, and Z wasn't done, or now wasn't a good time? Subconscious says, be careful what you wish for. Yeah. Right? Absolutely. Planning a vacation. Yeah. Okay. Right. So we start making this hard for ourselves. The other thing that I think happens is that the things that we say we want aren't actually ours. They're rooted in shoulds or expectations of what something should be or look like, this idea of success, right? So we start building our desires, our wants, based on somebody else's metric for what it could or should or be like, yeah? And so we have an opportunity to say, all right, if all of that is true, well, then what? How do we get to a different result? How do we start figuring out what it is that we want? Let me pause. What thoughts, what questions do you have at this point? Lois.
Well, yeah, I guess what I would say is, you're right. We've been programmed to put our own stuff aside, right? For a variety of reasons, evidence, conditioning. And so it's really hard to remember to, what do you really want? Because it was always, your marriage first, your family first, your kids first, your job first, your career, there was always something that you were supposed to, was more important.
Yeah. Thank you. Right. So this isn't, I don't want to say this. Brain is super foggy, friends. I'm not gonna lie. Total realness with me. You're getting real-time Elena, right? There is this idea that we are out of practice, because that's really what it is. And right, when I think about starting to figure out what it is you want, I would offer you that it's no different than building a muscle or learning a language. Right? That muscle has to get built over time, just like language starts with literacy. Has anybody ever watched a child learn to read? Right? They start learning to read in preschool. They don't learn letters first. They learn to hold a book the correct way. Right? They learn to open the book. They learn to look at pictures first. Then they look at letters. Figuring out what you want is very much like building literacy and then fluency. So it's that opportunity to say, okay, so this is where I've been recently, right? I haven't been practicing. What gets in our way is this, but I'm bad at it, but it's hard. Even that is wired in, right? And then it continues to be hard. There's something else that I'm going to offer. It gets in the way of figuring out what we want and then actually making a path to go for it. And it's the idea of being perpetually dissatisfied. I would offer that a lot of us set goals, right? And we work really hard to move towards them. And then when we get there, we tell ourselves, oh, it's not that big of a deal. Oh, it could have been better. Oh, I could have done this differently. And so then we diminish the feeling of how we wanted to feel. And then we set a new goal. And it's like this hamster wheel of striving for things that may actually not be important. Yeah. Those of you that have heard me talk about running marathons, right? I was a perpetually unsatisfied marathon runner. I set out the first one to prove a doctor wrong. I did that. And yet I wasn't satisfied. Had to do it again to prove the first that the first wasn't a fluke. Did that, still wasn't satisfied, right? And now apparently I have in my mind that I'm going to run another. Announcement 2022. I don't know which one, but here we go. But this time it's different because this time I have tapped into the why, to the feeling, which is where we are going in a second. So I want to share with you, I'm going to bring up a picture that I want you to take a look at. And when you see this picture, I would like you to just think about what feeling this, and some of you have heard this story, so in fact, all of you may have, but that's okay. I want you to do it anyway, please. I would like you to look at this picture and see what feeling this picture makes you think of, okay? So do you all see this picture? So in the chat, I would love for you to write, what feeling does this picture bring up for you? What comes up? Adventure. Anyone else? What picture? What? Free spirit, risk, fun. Yeah. Okay. So this picture was taken the first time that I stood up. You wouldn't know from this picture that I stood up on a surfboard. And what happened after I stood up on that surfboard, after several days of not standing up on a surfboard, was that I was so in awe and shocked that I had actually done it, that I had no idea what else to do than epic belly flop off the board, and a photographer was on the beach and caught it. Right, so I got lucky all around. But the reason I share that picture with you is because my desire, my want to learn to surf started with a feeling. It started when I was in Sayulita, Mexico, on just a little day trip. We were just there visiting, and my husband and I were there down at the beach, just kind of watching. There were the fishermen, there were pelicans, and there was a group of kids in the water learning to surf. And I probably should have brought up the picture of the young girl, because I have that too. But I saw this young girl, long brown hair, blue long sleeve rash guard, and she's on this surfboard, looking so joyful, so expressive, so proud of herself. I had never in my life thought that I wanted to learn to surf. But in that moment, I was like, I want to feel like she does. I want that. But because my brain goes to outcomes and goals, it went to, I need to learn to surf and to stand like this, right? To feel that way. Fast forward several years, I'm in Panama on a surf retreat. And I'm not very good. The first 2 days, in fact, I don't stand up on the surfboard. And afterwards, I'm in tears because the others are doing it. Why can't I? One more thing that I'm not good at doing, right? And the surf instructor, typical surfer dude, love Nick, he's amazing, said to me, and if you hang out with me for any length of time, you're going to hear me talk about this not infrequently. Could you practice determination instead of expectation? And I was like, what do you mean? He said, well, You wanted to learn to surf. Why? And I remembered the girl. And I remembered the feeling. He said, so could you move in the direction of that feeling? Could you be determined to tap into that feeling instead of expecting it to look a certain way? And then he said, and, oh, by the way, can we talk about what worked when you were out in the water? And I was like, nothing worked. I didn't stand on the board. And I love him. He was like, have you not heard me at all say that surfing has nothing to do with standing on the board? It has everything to do with catching the wave and letting the wave move you. And I was like, oh, right. I was totally getting schooled by a 20-something. So he said, so again, what worked? And that's when we realized I was a really good paddler. I was strong. I could paddle back out to the break really strongly. I wasn't getting tired. And actually, I was catching the waves on my belly, but I was finding it at that spot and starting to paddle with the energy of the wave. So the next day, I went back out and showed up with determination to feel the strength, to feel the pride. And I stood. And then I epic belly flopped. But better than the pictures of me surfing, I never show those. I tap into that picture of the belly flop, because that picture of the belly flop is like the picture I have of a young girl in Sayulita, because that was the feeling that I wanted. But we forget. We get really focused on outcomes. And so my nudge to you as we start to think about how to figure out what it is you want is to consider the goals that you have and start to take them apart a little bit, right? Because it really starts with a feeling. We get to the feeling sometimes with a goal, with an outcome. So I would love for you, some of you have already shared one thing that it is that you want, a goal, right? If you haven't named one yet, just jot down one thing that you think, it can be anything. It could be a vacation. It could be connection, new connections with low stress, getting new clients, right? It could be anything. It could be a new car. It could be a bouquet of flowers. Whatever it is, write it down for a second. And then I'd like you to think about why. Why do you want that thing? What's the feeling behind it? I'll give you a moment to jot that down. Financial security. So Lois, because I can, I'm going to push you. Why? Why? What is important about financial security? You can answer it up in the chat or just in your brain, right? You knew I was going to do that. Right? But we get to the why. And sometimes it takes several whys to really get to an emotion. I will tell you that at the end of the day, I'm going to say 90% of my clients, when I boil this down to like why, and it's a good 5 whys can help us. It usually comes down to being seen and heard and loved, or being seen or heard or loved, or sometimes all three. Right? Feeling connected, being heard, respected, part of something, and loved. That so many of our wants, when we really strip away all the layers, that's what it comes down to. And you can test me on that. But, right, and I would offer you that those feelings we can access without the destination, without the finish line, right? The other sometimes thing that happens is that we set these goals that have an end point, and we think we can only be satisfied when we've hit that end point. as opposed to along the way, right? That it doesn't have to be, in fact, it's not about the destination. The only reason that I've decided I think I'm going to do another marathon is because I think I'm ready to embrace the process and to allow myself to be filled by the process along the way and noticing progress, as opposed to just judging my success on what time it was when I crossed that finish line. It's the only reason that I think I'm ready to do it. And if I sign up for this, you've heard it here first, and at any point during my training, I become so focused on the time, I will stop, right? Because I know that that gets me into trouble. That then I will never be satisfied if that's all it is for me, right? So I will, in order to do this, if I really want to run another marathon, I have to get really clear on the why. And to me, the why comes back to strength, comes back to vibrancy. And so we start to play with, okay, so then what? Right? But before I get into the then what, let me ask, what questions or thoughts do you have so far? Takeaways, any thoughts? You can put them into the chat or take yourself off of mute. I'm hoping that through this, we're creating space for you around this idea of what it is we want and why it feels so hard. Emily says, letting others' opinions slide. Ooh, yeah, right? I mean, if we base everything we think we want based on everybody else, it's a tough mountain to climb. And all the judgments. Yeah. Thank you. Any other thoughts or questions or takeaways so far? And Maria and Lisa, welcome. It's good to see you. And Lillian, hi. So let's think about this, right? If you're willing to consider that this is hard because we haven't practiced, because we have wired the I don't know idea. And if you read, I sent out an email recently, and I think I probably posted about it in all the places, but I love it when I ask something and my clients say, I don't know, because they know, unless it's their first time with me, and then they quickly find out that the I don't know isn't going to stand. I'm pretty sure that my mom used to say to me, I don't know is not a response. And I was like, yes, it is. And yet I've used it too, but I don't know is a lie. It really is. It's a lie that we use for ourselves to protect ourselves, to keep ourselves safe, to keep ourselves where we are, right? It's a benevolent lie, but it's still a lie. And I tell this lie not infrequently to myself, right? I'm writing a book for months this year. I said, I don't know what the book is about. And one of my coaches said, Elena, you do know. I was like, no, I really don't. She said, stop. Of course you know. But I wasn't giving myself permission to know, to be still enough to release all those shoulds and all the judgments. Well, somebody else has written about this before. Why would anybody read a book from me about this thing, right? All of those things that have nothing to do with me. The core desire is to write a book that leaves a legacy and creates ripples, right? That's for me the why behind it. To create ripples, to benefit others, to impact others. Me saying I don't know does not help that why get out into the world. So if you are willing to take on this idea that you do know what it is you want, right? I've got 3 ways to start getting even more clear about what it is, to start naming it and then claiming it and owning it, right? So number 1, allowing. I wish it was more complicated than this, but it's not. We have to allow. And there are several things we get to allow. We get to allow yourself to have desires, to have wants. This is the part that we're not good at. This is the part where we say, I don't know, right? And one of the things that I do with my Thrive Circlers about halfway through is every day I invite them to add to a desire list. And at first they're like, no. And then they start playing with it, with the idea that you have desires, big and small. It could be you desire a specific tea or coffee. It's coffee, not tea today, right? It could be as small as wanting the piece of chocolate, right? It could be bigger, but practicing naming it, just like kids start to learn literacy by holding up a book. We have to practice naming our wants and needs. You don't have to, at this point, say them to anybody. You don't have to do anything about that. It's simply naming them. So you can start to allow yourself to name what it is you want. I would invite you to consider that this allowing practice is best served written down, because the brain sees it differently when you write it down, right? It begins to wire that connection of, oh, okay, they're serious about this. If it stays in your brain is going to do what it does. And it's going to have these other little thoughts that say, well, you don't really want that. Or have you tried saying that to somebody else? Because they're going to have thoughts, right? So the first piece is to allow yourself to name the desires, the wants, the needs, big and small. And this really, really is a practice that has nothing to do with the outcomes, right? So that's why I really think of this as allowing. You're just bubbling up, and you will start to notice that the more you do this, the easier it will become. At first, it might feel really hard. Or you might notice that all of your wants, your needs, your desires, whatever it is you want to call them, are around a certain thing. And that's okay. We're not judging it, because you start where you are. Okay. So this piece of allowing, practicing naming it. The only rule that I would offer you here is that there's no censoring. Or when there's, let me backtrack that. When you notice censoring, write it down anyway, and maybe put a star next to it. And notice what it is. Notice what that censoring is saying. We are not trying to ignore the conditions, the other stuff, right? But we are telling our brain what it is we want to focus on. No different than this morning, or frankly last night, when I said, I want to focus on feeling strong in my body. And then choosing this morning, yes, I had a sore throat. Yes, I was tired. Yes, all those things. None of that has changed. I'm not ignoring those things. I'm treating those things, and I'm tending to myself. But I'm allowing this other piece to be what guides me, right? This is, I often hear on some of the Peloton instructors say, are you, will you be guided by your inner cheerleader or your inner critic? Your inner advocate, your inner critic, right? You choose your words, but it's that. So allowing, right? The other piece about allowing is allowing your desires to exist. And I remember Martha Beck, who was my mentor and my teacher when I went through life coach training, used to talk about giving your dreams a mailbox. And this was a metaphorical mailbox, but one of these days I'm actually going to get a mailbox and put it on my counter. But it's this idea of creating a space for your desires, for your wants, your needs, all of these things to exist, to take up space in your life. Right? And because so often we say we want something and then we clutter our lives so much that it can't be possible. So we have to allow it to exist. So that's allowing. Number 2, when we think about claiming what it is you want, we have to start by practicing it, practicing feeling it. So once we've gotten over the hump of not knowing, and we just start practicing and gaining fluency and allowing and naming, then we practice. We practice feeling it, right? And the practicing feeling it happens in a variety of ways. The first is to notice, where does this feeling, notice I keep coming back to the feeling, where does this feeling already exist? Where does it exist? Right? So if the feeling that I was going for was vibrancy, well, the colors this morning were me practicing feeling the vibrancy. Right? Noticing the sky and the trees and the sun. Right? So we practice by noticing, where does it already exist? Another way to practice is to notice what's working. So as you're moving towards a desire, a want, right? And thinking about creating the path to get there, you have to notice what's working, because we're really good at noticing what's not working, right? We can come up with all the things that aren't working. But when we focus on what is, we practice, we play, right? So those are two questions that I love to ask when I'm practicing. The other way that I practice feeling something is, does anyone remember the old radio dials, right? You turn it one way, it's all fuzz. You turn it the other way, and suddenly Casey Kasem comes in loud and clear, right? Or whatever it was you were listening to. I remember like top 40 on Saturday mornings or Sunday mornings, and suddenly it was there, and then you'd hear all the as you got closer, he would have what were they called when people would write in and say, you know, the dedication songs. I don't know why I remember that. There you go. But so there are lots of ways to attune to a feeling, to sync up with. It's no different than an orchestra that syncs up with that first violinist, or a chorus whose voices sync up together, right? We want to attune to this feeling. And there are some different ways you can attune that I love to play with. A song that represents that feeling is you feel it in your body. If you hung out with me during our first masterclass about the inhabit path, you know, movement was that first step along the inhabit path, to feel something in your body. And a song helps you feel something in your body because it creates that sensory response. Maybe you move to it, maybe you dance, right? Maybe you sing out loud, but finding a song that represents the feeling. A symbol could be a word or a picture that represents that feeling. And having that in a place where you're gonna see it, right? All of the passwords on my phone, on the things, are about a feeling that I wanna feel, right? The other thing that I love to do in terms of practicing, and this is not just me, this is a tried and true, you know, strategy used by so many, is visualization. The brain doesn't actually know the difference between a real memory and a made up memory that you're visualizing. If you can allow that visualization to be sensory based, right? What do you see? What do you hear? And really inhabit it through all of the senses. The brain doesn't know the difference. So it's why you hear about athletes and entrepreneurs and all sorts of people visualize. They go through all of the steps before they go do something, right? We heard about this a lot, or I remember hearing about it a lot, and it stuck out to me so much. The movie Free Solo, where the climber visualized every single step of his climb of El Capitan, where his fingers were going to be, where his toes were going to be before he climbed. Right? His entire body had practiced feeling the feeling and reaching the top before he ever did it. So visualization is an incredibly powerful strategy to help you create that path to get what it is that you desire. So we have naming it by allowing. We have claiming it by practicing. And notice none of these have anything to do with the outcome, right? And then if we think about inhabiting this, claiming it, really rather owning it, we have to stop waiting. We have to stop waiting for all the conditions to be right. And we have to take a jump, a step into it, towards it. Even when other people say not to. Now, do this safely, right? I'm not saying go out and do anything that's unsafe, but right, it's this idea of the only person who gets to decide if the time is right is you. And maybe the time isn't right. Maybe the conditions aren't perfect. Right? Some of you have heard me talk about, I went paragliding one time in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. It's something that one of these days I will do again. But that entire weekend, when I, again, was there for a half marathon, not to paraglide, but the entire weekend became about me wanting to go paragliding. Because when I watched these parachutes coming down from the mountain on my first morning, they were so colorful, they were so vibrant. I was so curious, right? In that respect, you can't paraglide if the conditions aren't right. The wind has to be just so. But right, tapping into that feeling. So sometimes you take the jump. I heard once, it was probably a Peloton ride. I'm not gonna lie, I'm not gonna try to hide it. Somebody said, can we redefine the word fail? And it was Bex Gentry. She's a running instructor. She said, how about fail is just an acronym for first attempt in learning. And I kind of loved that, right? Because if you're going to take this jump, you get to take it with the perspective of you have everything to gain and nothing to lose. And that can be hard because we like to get things right. Yeah, anybody else like to get things right? Okay, good, not alone. So, quick story, years ago, I got to work with a woman who she had participated in a workshop with me, and she identified this desire, this want of learning to pole vault. And there were all sorts of reasons that she had why that was a ridiculous idea. She didn't consider herself particularly fit. She was older than what she thought anybody would be who was going to start pole vaulting. She had never done this. She wasn't even a runner. All the reasons she couldn't do it. But when we worked together and she started playing with, all right, what is this really about? She recognized that the feeling was about feeling strong and proud of her body, which was something that she hadn't felt in a really long time. So to allow that to start to happen, she had to name it. And then she also had to allow herself to have compassion for herself. She wasn't going to go out tomorrow and like jumping into it was not going to be taking a pole vault jump. Right. In fact, to this day, I don't think she's ever actually done it, but she's done other things that have made her feel like it and realize it wasn't at all about the pole vaulting. Right. So she practiced, she allowed self-compassion for herself. And then she practiced noticing, where does this feeling of feeling pride in her body and strong already exist? And she recognized that that existed when she went out and took a walk with her dog. Right? And then with her grandchildren when she was out playing with them. And so the more she started practicing, noticing where this already existed, her jump was to join a walking group. And she still, to this day, 2 or 3 years later, changed a little bit in COVID, takes these long walks with a walking group several times a week and savors the fact of feeling strong and proud in her body. She's walked places she'd never walked before. She's met people. She's had other experience that have started from that, right? The ripple effect. And so there's this idea of it's rarely actually about the thing that we think we want. So when we can pull back all the layers and really get to the feeling, that's where the richness is. That's where we can play. Right? And that's what we get to allow and practice and then inhabit. So I would love to know what questions you have, what thoughts come up for you. What feelings do you want to move in the direction of with some of your desires?
Well, that's interesting you said that because, pole vaulting is such a unusual activity, I guess I'll just say.
Yeah.
But have also been feeling lately not feeling strong, just having just weird things happening like so yeah, aging's not fun. So what is it going to take to feel strong again? So yeah, so that's definitely the desire that I am like present to.
Yeah, thank you, Lois, for sharing, right? So the invitation becomes, so where do you already feel strong, right? So you've named it, I want to feel strong, right? And then noticing, where do you already feel strong, right? And where, how might you cultivate that feeling? And there is, so I remember, and I still kind of do this to some degree, when Martha Beck, my mentor and teacher, used to talk about wildly improbable goals. Right? And so we give ourselves permission to say, like, I have this goal, it's wildly improbable, right? It's going to take effort to do them, to create it. And when I first did this years ago, I was in my old house, and I remember I wrote I had three, doesn't matter, probable goals on Post-it notes. And I like colored Post-it notes, and I had a door in my office. And so I wrote them down at the bottom. And then her suggestion was, write all of the steps that you think it's going to take, all of the things that you think you have to do, right? And put them on separate things. And I just happened to use Post-it notes. And so I had like all of these Post-it notes, right? So I remember two of my goals. One was to lead a retreat in Patagonia. Still hasn't happened, but, and the second was actually to get to lead workshops at Rancho La Puerta, which a few of you have been to. And what's funny is, right, a lot of the things that had to get done were similar on both. And I started naming it, and I was like, oh, hey, that's interesting. But the minute that I started naming all of the steps to get to that very top thing that I thought was so unrealistic, what I noticed was, oh, wait, actually, that one's already done, right? Or doing one thing led to another thing, check, check, done, done. But it was when I tapped into the feeling and gave myself permission, okay, map it out. Then I started getting to like hopscotch around. And what we realize is we often put so many things in our way. I didn't need steps 2 through 12, right? Those were conditions that I put in my head of what I thought was going to be necessary. I didn't need them because one thing led to another thing and led to another thing. And so there's this thing that we do. So once you start really practicing feeling it, then you start noticing that the things you thought were necessary maybe aren't. Maybe other things are. So share that in case it resonates. Other questions or thoughts? So I would love if you're feeling courageous, because sometimes taking the jump is just saying something out loud or to somebody else. So I would love for you to consider one thing that you might give yourself permission to allow yourself to want, to allow yourself to desire. And then name the feeling that's behind it. And put that in the chat or take yourself off of mute and say it out loud. And that can be your job. That you will have practiced all of the things. And as you're doing that, I want to invite you to consider that this practice of naming, of allowing, of noticing where something is working, these are daily practices, right? And the more that you can do it, the more you will quiet the wants, the needs, the dreams that aren't yours. The truth about how to figure out what you want and creating a plan to get there is that your truest self is the one that has the answers. Right? So I want to share with you a quote from A Woman's Guide to Power, Unbound, A Woman's Guide to Power by Kasia Urbaniak, who says, true desires are a message from you to you about what will make you feel truly alive. So true desires are a message from you to you about what will make you feel truly alive. And if I can impress anything upon you, it's this idea that how to figure out what you want starts with connecting to a part of you that maybe you haven't listened to in a while. Maybe you haven't made space for lots of good reasons, right? But that the exploration is an invitation to connect with that part of you. And I keep pointing to my heart. I don't actually think that our desires, our wants come from our heart. They might. I think they come from this place in our low belly where we feel, and it's, if you know anything about the chakras, the yogic system of energy, there are 7 chakras. They start at the root, right? So that kind of sacral area, that's where we feel safe. Then you move into creativity and pleasure and expression. Then you move into confidence and power. And it's those 3 areas that I think, where I think that churn starts. The churn that then gives you the seed that creates that, this might be interesting. And then I think they move into our heart, right? And I often talk about planting a seed when I'm leading a yin yoga practice, kind of in that space around your heart, because we think about that as a nurturing place. But it's my belief that it lives in those lower parts of us and comes up when we allow it. So this gets to be the exploration. This is the work. This is why it's not just like flipping a switch. And you all know that I love, and if you don't know, let me just explicitly say, I love doing this work with individuals to get to that place where you can be so connected with that truest version of you that you can name and claim and inhabit your desires without guilt. Right? And if that is of interest to you, reach out, because I would be delighted to get to explore that with you. But this is a place for you to start practicing, just writing down, what is it that you desire, big or small? Have a running list, have a Post-it somewhere, back of an envelope, start writing it down. And then find a day or a moment in your day to consider, why is this important? Why? Pick one, tap into that feeling and notice, where does it already exist? And then give yourself permission. It doesn't have to be every day. But once in a while, maybe once a week, maybe twice a week, to jump to take a step, even if you're uncertain, towards that desire without expectation, just because. So with that, I will leave you with the reminder that our sessions next week, we have 2 more sessions next week. On Tuesday at 12:30 p.m. Eastern, we're talking about prioritize this instead of that. And I'll leave you wondering. And then on Thursday, you have an opportunity. We're going to do a coffee, tea chat with some hot seat coaching, which means there's going to be an application. I'll send an email probably on Monday where you can apply for depending on how many people, I think I should have room for 4, 10 to 15 minute hot seat coaching sessions, which means we'll be on Zoom and you'll get to ask a question and you will have applied, which means there will be a specific question that you'll ask and we'll play with that, something that you're working on. And the benefit of hot seat coaching is that you get coaching and get to play with that, but then everybody else that's there gets to participate in the watching and has their own realizations. I can tell you that in the group that I'm a part of with my coach, when she does hot seat coaching, I tend to get more for me from watching other people get coached than I necessarily do than when I get coached, right? Because I'm really attached to that. And that's not, there's still big transformation in that, but there's so much power in just being there, a part of the group and taking it in. And that will be on Thursday, I think in the morning. I don't remember exactly what time. I didn't write it down. I want to say it's 10. So be on the lookout for those. It's the same link. So join us there. I'm happy to linger for any questions or takeaways. But thank you all for being here and for participating. And I can't wait to see how you integrate these explorations. Have a fabulous rest of your day. You're so, so welcome. Thank you all. All right.